interesting career, and worked for some computer companies in Australia, and has more recently become a real expert at the mega project paradox, basically why we can't get shit done. And I thought, since our theme this year has been the transition to renewable energy, and we've just seen the interesting failure of the grid in Spain and Portugal, and everyone's been saying, oh, well, that's because of a lack of inertia, that somebody who actually understands a bit about how grids work could talk to us about that, and about the challenges of transmission, and we can stray into whatever things around the edge of that interest everybody. You know, like, where do you put the nuclear reactors? You know, spare transmission, for instance. We want to go there. Anyway,
John's farm, your farm.
Yeah. We all want a nuclear reactor in our backyard.
Exactly.
If they could put it under my wife's riding arena, as long as I can have a bunker next.
To get the warmth right.
Yeah, you'll never run out of hot water for the bath, that's for sure.
Just wait till 2050, there'll be 7 down at Port Adelaide.
Oh yes.
Well,
Apparently.
you would rationally put them near the load, I would have thought. But anyway.
No, there will be, because there's submarines.
Well, thanks, John. So, restricting my talk to half an hour is a real struggle for me. Normally I could talk on this for hours, if not days or weeks. But a slight correction. My first job actually was with Schlumberger as a borehole logging engineer, so in gas exploration, oil and gas exploration. But then I came back and started building power stations, which is something I've done across my career. Power stations, transmission lines, substations in all NEM regions and in many power islands around Australia. I want to start off by saying well done for being residents of South Australia, because very often it's, with these sorts of mega project things happening around us, we don't actually perceive it. It's one of those things that, we swim in, we're the fish, we swim in the water, and the water is changing around us and we don't really recognise that. You happen to live in the jurisdiction in the world that is making the fastest transition to 100% renewable energy using exclusively solar, wind and battery. And that is because we happen to be the driest state on the driest continent. And flat. So we don't actually have any hydroelectricity. People that actually know that we've got weirs or dams in the hills probably know that they're filled from the Murray River, so we don't have any natural large rivers or creeks other than the Murray, and if the Murray wasn't there, Adelaide wouldn't be here. In fact, Whyalla wouldn't be where it is either, except for the 2 pipelines that go from the Murray to Whyalla, built by Australia's greatest and the Commonwealth's greatest ever Premier, a guy by the name of Playford, who is the longest serving Premier, not only in the history of this state or in the history of Australia, but in the history of the Commonwealth. And a lot of people don't realise that.
My mother talks to him regularly.
Yeah, absolutely.
93 or something rather, she still talks to him regularly.
So when I grew up, I'm 68, so when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I was lucky to grow up in a state which really ruled Australia. And it's been frittered away ever since. It's been frittered away sadly ever since. However, I can see great things coming. So I'll read you a post I put up on LinkedIn recently that summarises it as to where we are now. South Australia's legislated 2027 goal of a net 100% renewable energy transition for the SA NEM region is often misunderstood by traditional electricity grid operators, engineers, designers, regulators, and therefore the public. South Australia has a gigawatt scale interconnected electricity grid called the SA NEM region. SA is the driest state on the driest inhabited continent with no access to hydroelectricity or pumped hydro. Consequently, South Australia's legislated 2027 renewable energy transition uses 100% solar, wind and battery. South Australia is transitioning from the old, manually operated, centralised, fossil-fuelled analogue grid. I'll say that again. What we have grown up with is the old, manually operated, centralised, fossil-fuelled analogue grid. What we are moving to in South Australia is making this happen, is the new, automated, distributed, variable renewable energy and storage powered digital grid. So South Australia's new distributed digital mimicking of old synchronous machines is not a step back, it's a superior evolution of the SA NEM. The ability to support, so if you're not an electrical engineer, very often this electricity stuff looks like magic, right? From power stations, it's always been AC. There was a battle between Westinghouse and Edison in the United States between whether it was going to be DC or AC, and AC with Tesla won, right? And hence, for the last 150 years, the world has been building national grids based upon alternating current. In the United States, I think it's 60 hertz. In Australia, it's 50 hertz, and it's different frequencies in different places, but it's all around that 50, 60 hertz thing. And the point is that that frequency, that national frequency in Australia, which is 50 hertz, it's got to be in a very tight tolerance. It's got to be managed in that very, very tight tolerance. And if it goes outside of that tolerance, bad things start happening. Bad things start happening. Usually leads to blackouts, like what's happened in Iberia. So the ability to support frequency in thousands of locations distributed across the South Australian NEM region, rather than follow frequency in a handful of centralised locations, makes grid-forming inverters on solar, wind farms, and BESS, battery energy storage systems, and automated synthetic or virtual, or what I like to call it digital inertia, software on battery energy storage systems, these are more than compensation tools. They are enablers of a new SA NEM grid system logic. So ironically, I'm talking to a crowd which is very often from the telecommunications / IT&T space, right? You're probably aware that even in your homes today, most of the appliances really could run on nothing other than DC. Okay? In fact, every appliance, you could get DC fridges and you can get DC washing machines. We should actually, I see us transitioning back from AC to DC for everything, including transmission. The South Australian government is no longer trying to force DVRES assets into an outdated mechanical paradigm, although AEMO did ask Electronet to install Synchronous in its Davenport and Robertstown substations at the same time as we decided to install HPR in 2017. We installed HPR as the Hornsdale Power Reserve, it's the first battery energy storage system installed on the NEM. It was installed in South Australia in under 100 days in 2017, sorry, or it would be free. And as soon as it was installed, we have two interconnectors from South Australia to Victoria, one through the Murray Lands called Murraylink, which is the longest underground HVDC interconnector in the world, and the major link, which was first actually built in 1988, 11 years before the NEM started, the Hayward interconnector, which is a 650 megawatt overhead HVAC interconnector. That was originally built in 1988, so South Australia could access cheap, Victorian, subsidised by the Victorian taxpayer, coal-fired power. And those Murraylink was built in 2002, but Hayward, basically we sucked electricity from Victoria to South Australia for virtually every year until HPR was built. The instant HPR was built, South Australia became a net exporter of electricity to Victoria. That's the impact that that one small battery energy storage system had on the entire NEM. So, South Australia's new net 100% renewable energy paradigm, I call it DVRES, Distributed Variable Renewable Energy Storage, is not an imitation of the old centralised synchronous inertia paradigm. It's not that. What it is an intentional and superior redesign of the SA NEM region. So instead, the SA government is redefining what frequency stability means in a NEM system where speed outperforms inertia, intelligence outperforms mass, and distributed automated response outperforms centralised manual control. Ironically, conventional gas, diesel, coal and nuclear-fired power plants were designed to stabilise the system. In 2025, battery energy storage systems and grid-forming inverters stabilise the system through something called automated virtual inertia software instructions. South Australia's gigawatt-scale internet-connected grid has the world's highest penetration of solar, wind and battery inverter-based resources and no baseload. I'll say that again. South Australia's gigawatt-scale internet-connected grid has the world's highest penetration of solar, wind and battery inverter-based resources and no baseload. AEMO's December 2024 System Strength Report identifies that the SA NEM region is the only NEM region with no system strength shortfalls in 2025. Isn't that interesting? We're the only state or territory in the country that has no baseload and has the highest penetration of solar, wind and battery, and yet we are the only state, the only NEM region with no system strength shortfalls. I'll finish off before I get the question. Grid system engineers, this is for the electrical engineers around the table, and I know there's two of us, I don't know how many more. Grid system engineers, designers and planners will have to see traditional tools like Plexos, DigiSilent and other EMS SCADA tools either evolve to model the new digital grid and stop inserting synchronous machines in their models, or we need to find new tools for the new digital grid system design. Question?
When you said that we're going to have baseload, I think a lot of people argue that it's only because there is a line to other jurisdictions that provide us with that baseload. Is that correct?
So I think what you're trying to say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that, just to set it up for everybody here, there are three key factors that makes South Australia the leader of the world in transitioning to renewable energy, 100% renewable energy. Those three key factors are, first of all, bipartisan political support. So we have got legislation in this state that advanced Stephen Marshall, the Liberal Premier's goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030. The current Premier has advanced that through legislation to 2027, 100%. And so that's the first thing. We have no political dissent. There is no political dissent about this in South Australia. That is an amazing thing, and we should celebrate that. The second thing we have is an advanced program of installation of new DVRES assets. So we have, I think it's seven
batteries?
No, seven or nine RESs, renewable energy zones, across the state. So we cover this, we identify the renewable energy zones where we identify, you know, what's best for wind, what's best for solar irradiation, and that sort of stuff. And then we put the batteries in the relevant locations. So we have fantastic renewable energy zone We have a fantastic renewable energy zone atlas on the internet, sponsored by the government, which is fantastic. So we're building assets like crazy. We do have, as of yesterday, as of the last few days now, 7 operational batteries in this state. There's another 10 coming online by 2027 to make it 100% renewable. The third thing we have is an advanced TNSP, Transmission Network Service Provider, Electronet. The guy I used to go to university with is driving this guy called Rainer Corte, and he would have been here today except he's speaking in Melbourne. They have developed a new plan to bring on more renewable energy assets in a parallel process as opposed to the old serial process which AEMO has dictated. So we are not only innovating in terms of the actual assets being installed on the grid, we're innovating in terms of the policy and legislation at both the political level and at the transmission network service provider level. So quite interesting what's going on. But the state, the way we call it a net 100% goal for 2027 because the state has currently 2 interconnectors to Victoria. The first one was built in 1988. As I said, it's an HVDC 650 megawatt overhead transmission link to Victoria on the direct route to the Latrobe coal-fired power stations. We have the longest underground HVDC interconnector in the world between Berry and Redcliffs in Victoria, 120 kilometres. And we have just in January of this year connected the first stage of Project Energy Connect, the 3rd interconnector in Australia, but this one goes direct to New South Wales. When that's finished in 2027, again that net 100% goal here, it will be an 800 megawatt overhead HVAC 330 kV link. So in total, you've got 650 plus 220 plus the 800, so you've got 1670 megawatts of interconnector. Now, a lot of people mistakenly who don't understand the electricity grid, a lot of people say to me that, well, we can only be 100% net DVRES because we've got 2 interconnectors from Victoria. Well, I just said earlier on in this meeting that from the instant we installed HPR in 2017, South Australia has become a net exporter of predominantly renewable energy to Victoria, okay? And if anybody doubts that, I can explain to them the open electricity SCADA chart, which I regularly, I get people on LinkedIn all the time saying, oh, that's not right, that's not right. Well, obviously you cannot read the bloody SCADA chart, right? It's there for you to look at. And if you want, I'll explain it in detail. The addition of a 3rd interconnector to New South Wales is great for the state, not because it allows more electricity to come to us. On the contrary, what it does is it opens up new renewable energy zones to build new wind farms, new solar farms, new battery energy storage systems so that we can pump more electricity to the east coast. And it opens up new renewable energy zones in New South Wales along the route of that transmission line, which has never existed. So if you think about it, power stations from electrical engineers mostly know this, but again, we're all the fish swimming in the water. You know, we don't, as you drive around this city, how many of you seriously take notice of the Stovey poles and the wires? Who notices them? Okay. You know, probably because you dislike them and you know you don't want to run into them, right? But the fact of the matter is, you might know they're there, but you don't really think that much about what they do for us, I don't think.
But they are ugly.
They are ugly.
Look at some of the cabling up there, it's artwork. If you look at some of the old splicing and...
You should go to Thailand if you want artwork.
No, that's a different sort of artwork. That's more...
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about Stovey. I mean, I worked with one of the Stovey family when I was at ETSA, at Torrens Island, and I taught one of the Stovey family when I was teaching electrical engineering at Adelaide Uni. But, so I know them across the generations. The good thing about the Stobie pole is that you'll see every now and again they carry transformers up there. What happens to transformers when they fail? Do you know?
Blow up,
They blow up. And then what happens when they blow up?
power goes out.
Yeah, but more precisely, what happens to the transformer? Fires. Fires. You know what happens everywhere else around Australia?
You got a wood pole.
When you've got a wood pole with a fire on top of a wood pole, all sorts of trouble. So the beauty of the Stobie pole is that it actually isolates transformer fires really, really well. And speaking of this man Schumann here, is the only man in the world that I know who understands the strengths and weaknesses of patenting in the United States, China, and Australia. That man there is not only the greatest patenter I have ever met, he's also the most litigious man in the world. Don't you dare breach his patents. He knows how to protect himself. So Stobie, the original guy who invented the Stobie pole, patented it. And so the old Electricity Trust of South Australia and Stobie actually benefited from that patent over the years, and it's a shame we haven't seen it promulgated into other states, because it's actually, we manufacture them here, of all places. So, answering your question, the interconnectors, since HPO was installed in 2017, actually enable South Australia to grow more and more renewable energy assets, because places like the ACT claim to be 100% renewable. It's because they purchase, it's because the contract for electricity is with the assets that sit in South Australia, right? And notionally, I mean, they don't have a direct interconnection to South Australia. There are current interconnectors between New South Wales and Victoria. There are 2 interconnectors between Victoria and South Australia. So vicariously through those interconnections, the ACT can claim that they're purchasing electricity from South Australia. But that doesn't make any real visible or electrical sense.
Could the whole of Australia do without baseload power?
Yes. So, I mean, as an electrical engineer, I've been working on this all my life. As some of you would know, because I've spoken at this thing once or twice before. In the 2018 election, state election, I stood for Nick Xenophon against Jay Weatherall and Sid Cheltenham. I've never stood for politics before or after that time. The only reason I did it, ironically, and this was what got me started on LinkedIn, was because my major client at the time was in Western Australia, and I actually happened to be home in Adelaide on September the 28th of 2016 when we had a black start. And that really annoyed me, because I've been involved in one black start previously, and it was in about 1980, 81. And at that time I was working at the power station. So I was accountable.
A question about that.
Yeah.
In 2016, I had the best title of anybody in the world. I was the General Manager Power. I had all the power.
For who?
Broad spectrum, transfield services.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm an accountant. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I know nothing about the world you're talking about, other than the fact I had this wonderful title, General Manager Power. And we went out. Yeah, I was Power. Yes, thank you. A great title, the best title ever. But I was an accountant, so I wielded it carefully. Now, in 2016, as you rightly said, the power went out, and I went to Melrose, and we actually went and restrung the whole temporary power lines up there under a contract with Electronet.
Very good.
Now, we built a second interconnector to New South Wales. It was justified at the time. The money was put away by government at the time to justify the fact that we would never have another power outage like that ever again, because we've now got a new interconnector that's going to happen between us and New South Wales. What you're suggesting now is that 9 years later, we are now suggesting that we are completely autonomous because of batteries, and we are now exporting out of these interconnectors power to the other states as opposed to
Net exporting.
net exporting. So are we now our own asynchronous problem-solving issue in South
Let's go
Australia?
back to the September 28th,
Yep.
2016. And
Three-day blackout.
It got me writing on LinkedIn, major detailed posts. I've got a detailed analysis on that. So if you're not linked in to me, link in.
I just have.
And if you want me to send you that article, I will.
Thank you.
I did a second-by-second analysis. And let me help you I'll succinctly try and explain it to you. I think most of us are old enough to remember being in your house with a crowd of people in the middle of winter, and you've got lots of people, might have been a party or something, and you've got all the lights on in all the rooms, because it's winter time, it's cold, you've got heaters on in multiple rooms, and somebody decides they want to put on some toast. Put some toast in the toaster and bang, the lights go out, right? That's effectively what happened in South Australia, because AEMO, try not to swear too much, AEMO is the regulator that's supposed to operate South Australia. Okay? Well, AEMO was at fault on that day, because the Bureau of Meteorology had forecast an extreme weather event in South Australia 2 days ahead of it. When that happens,
Medium.
the NEM rules allow for AEMO to suspend the normal operations of the NEM at the time of the extreme weather event. So you usually suspend NEM operations for a few hours before the forecast event by Bureau of Meteorology. And you direct all of the power stations in the region of the extreme weather event to turn on.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
So in 2016, not now, but in 2016, just around the Port River, in the 7 gas-fired power stations we had then, there is about 3 gigawatts of generating capacity.
Which is way more than ours.
Well, the demand at the time of the Black Start was about 1.6 gigawatts.
Yeah.
Which is an average. And you know what all the gas-fired power stations were doing at that time?
Turned off.
They were turned off. There was only 2 units at Torrens Island Power Station operating, generating about 300 megawatts. Now, what AEMO should have done, and I've written this down, and people can read it, and nobody will argue with it because they know I'm right. AEMO should have suspended normal NEM operations. They should have directed all of the power stations in Adelaide to turn on. And guess what would have happened if transmission lines 200 kilometres from Adelaide, which is the major load centre in South Australia, blew down? Nothing!
Yes.
Nothing would have happened, which is what should have happened. But you know what AEMO did? They did not suspend normal NEM operations as they were supposed to. Worse, some idiot who shall remain nameless, because I don't know their name. If I knew their name, I would name them. Right? Some idiot inside of AEMO decided to say, well, we're going to have an extreme weather event in South Australia. You know what we'll do? We'll pump electricity at maximum rate from Victoria into South Australia at the time of the extreme weather event. That's what we'll do, instead of directing all the power stations in South Australia to turn on.
Which probably reduced that.
Now, so what that means is it's like your house. The party's on, heaters in every room, the lights are on, the music's playing, all the electricity in the house is on, and then somebody decides they're going to put the toast on. In this case, it was the transmission lines blown over. What happens when transmission lines blown over? 3 circuits. A transient flicks through the system. As soon as it hit Murray Link, bang, Murray Link failed. And within seconds, because it's further down in the southeast, Hayward failed.
Yep.
There goes 870 megawatts of the power providing our 1.6 gigawatt load. Every power station left in South Australia, mostly renewables, were then just automatically clicked off. It was AEMO's fault. And AEMO, because they're a federal bloody government regulator, can't be sued.
Well, I'd like to meet that guy in AMU because he made me an extra $25 million that year. Well done. I'd like to buy him a drink.
He wouldn't have, no, it was the winds that blew the transmission lines.
But if it hadn't have gone out, I wouldn't have had crews up there for months building the Melrose, restringing the Melrose thing,
Yeah.
and that made us
That was the extreme weather event. There are only
weirdest thing. It's a $400 million job, and I made 25 million out of
That
it.
this gentleman raised, and I'll talk about eat your lunch.
My bonus that year was perfect. Thank you.
Because it was in the mood.
For a moment, and just switch
Or a
into
bill should have been done,
introduction.
just slow.
Oh yeah, we had crews up there for months. It's fantastic.
So let's do introductions. I believe I can provide a small one. Suggest heading towards briefer rather than longer, but